Welcome back to Les Schwab Tire Center's Outdoor GPS, presented by Fisherman's Marine and Outdoor.
Welcome back, everyone. We're joined by Shane Magnuson. He is the owner-operator of Upper Columbia River Guide Service, and for some reason I got tongue-tied there. We're going to talk spring Chinook. It's on our doorstep, man. It's the first week of March, right? You had already mentioned, you and your wife had already mentioned that. Where'd winter go, right? March 2nd, now it's full-blown spring Chinook season for a lot of people. You're a professional. When do you get out there with your clients first? When's your first booked date?
You know, that my first book date isn't till really the end of this month, you know, when we start really getting some numbers in the river and I feel we can get enough bites to make everybody happy. But fishing time, we saw the river level when it hits that bottom part where you had it up here. There's fish here. If you want to go and spend a day and you get a nice day, it's worth a troll or worth a day of plunking.
No question. I hope the plunking thing works this year. Last year was kind of a tough deal. This year, hopefully things will work out. Prior to the show, you had mentioned that things were a little bit different this year as opposed to last year. Temperatures, conditions. Can you kind of fill us in on what your thoughts were on that?
You know, I'm actually looking at the weather we drove in on today. I'm going, you know, this is the weather we had at the end of March last year.
Right, which is crazy.
And so we're about 3.5, 4 weeks earlier on this weather. And temperature-wise in the river, Bonneville, it's already above 42 degrees. Where last year it was 37 to 38. So we're definitely looking at some, you know, there's probably some fish trickling around. You know, the fish are start getting a little snappy around 42, willing to bite. So I think you're going to see some fish being caught a little earlier this year.
Now, again, you mentioned you're not going to have clients out on the water until the end of the month. You're especially proximity, right, where you live, your opportunity, and just desire to go out there, right, and figure out what's going on before you put clients in the boat. Is there something that you look at that makes you go, yeah, we got to go? I mean, is it a temperature thing? You've mentioned that. Is it just a condition thing on a particular day? Or is there just something that you wait for and go, I got to go at least explore?
For me, it's a huge temperature thing, honestly. You know, and usually between 42 and 43, it starts piquing my interest. I'm like, all right, okay, we're getting there. And it's, you know, those fish, if you look year in, year out, the numbers really bounce over Bonneville Dam at 48. 48 and above, you see those numbers. So at this time, those fish are definitely there nosing their way in.
With just a couple of fish over Bonneville, it's nothing to get too excited about, but that does mean, though, that there's fish below it, right? It doesn't mean that the only two fish that are in the river have crossed Bonneville Dam. They stage in multiple different areas. What's your favorite way? Maybe that's not the best way to put it. What's your go-to way, early season, to be most confident when you're targeting springers? Trolling, I know you don't spend much time, if any, on the anchor, but what's your go-to setup if you were going to go out early? Say there's somebody nutty that's going to be fishing on Monday, Tuesday, on the Columbia somewhere. How would you be fishing?
This Monday, Tuesday, with those water levels, everything, you know, still running pretty hard, I would really consider setting the pick. Putting out some mag lips, maybe a dropper lead with a spinfish. And
that's interesting all by itself.
And letting those fish move through you. But I'm a troll guy. I mean, I know looking at water right now, that's probably the best option. Go find a pinch point. But I get a little ADD on that, so I like to throw out a herring, a fish flash, and go for it.
And cover ground. Are there different things that you might look for, situations, conditions, where you would be more confident than maybe another area on the Columbia to do that, to start trolling in those conditions, or just for the pure, you know, not great opportunities, take advantage of what you have, just drop the hook and wait?
You know, this goes back to current and really tide movement. You start getting tidal movement below Portland, obviously. So, especially when this water's cold like this, tide changes and it's kind of slacker current, go trolling. You know, those fish are up off the bottom a little bit. They're willing to move. They're willing to grab something and snap even though it's cold. But that current gets running pretty hard and they don't want to move far because it's cold. That's where you might want to set the pick. It may not be one option for the whole day. You may look at
good point.
You may look at trolling for part of it, and then when you hit a certain spot in the tide or movement, then you switch over to setting the pick if you can find a spot. You know, spots are few and far between sometimes, but
Now, it's not going to be blown out as far as the conditions on the Columbia, but when you get into the 7s, high 6s, it still pushes you to the bank. There's still going to be areas like he's referring to, pinch points, locations that might be more likely where the fish might come through, finding the right seam, the right structure, believe it or not. So that certainly comes into play. Okay, baits. We talked a little bit about this before the show. For 100 years, it was fish this before this temperature, fish this after this temperature. Don't fish shrimp until you get to this temp. Stay with herring until you get past this temp. What are your thoughts on that? And is there a point, even in cool water conditions, before they close it on the Columbia, before that first week of April, that you might go from herring to prawns or coon shrimp or something like that? Is there a favorite bait for you there, or is there something that might make you go, let's try this instead of that?
You know, so we were talking about this, obviously, and I had this conversation with my wife. For years, we've been like, all right, you know, coon shrimp, 50 degrees and up, they really start biting on them, and, you know, this and that and the other thing. We hear all this stuff. But honestly, anymore, I mean, we're watching guys catch them plunking off spinning-goes and coon shrimp right now.
Right.
You know, water's 42, 44, maybe 45 degrees in some places. So that's, you know... tuna the same way, herring the same way. Herring's like, oh, it's a cold water bait. Well, we catch salmon in the fall when it's 60 on herring.
True.
So, I don't know. For trolling wise, I like a good herring right now. Good herring is great. It's a good cold water bait. It's good for covering ground. But the last couple of years, I've been throwing on a prawn spinner down here in the lower Columbia end of March and dropping it off a back rod, and it's catching fish too.
Interesting.
So don't be afraid to throw them.
Is it one? Oh, he's yelling at me now. I can't keep asking these questions, Ryan. All right, we're going to cut away. We're going to come back and pick up on that because it's interesting when you're talking different baits to run behind it. And we might even forget this. I know I try to remind you of it, but the spinning fish is something that you simply can't overlook behind a fish flash or even a 360 early on in the spring Chinook season. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
Outdoor GPS is brought to you by Yakima Bait, steeped in tradition, innovation, and fishing success. And by Procure Bait Sense, ruthlessly effective.